This video explains about Japanese villages. Until just 100 years ago, more than 90% of people lived by farming. In other words, it is safe to say that farming villages were home to all of the people. In the previous article, I looked at farming villages in Edo. This time, I will look at farming villages, famines and uprisings in the middle of the Edo period. Japan's rice production doubled in the 100 years from the beginning of the Edo period. The large-scale agricultural land development that began in the Edo period transformed the farmers who had previously worked under powerful farmers into independent farmers with their own land. This meant that the domain had more taxpayers, and they welcomed the increase in independent farmers. This increase in rice production stimulated economic development, and in places like Edo and Osaka, the merchants became wealthy and some of them became very rich. A large-scale monetary economy was established. As urban life became more affluent, other crops besides rice were also produced. In order to obtain money, the clans had the farmers grow crops that were suited to their land and sell them in Edo and Osaka. Large-scale development of rice paddies and fields produced so much rice that there was a surplus in Japan, and there was room to grow cash crops in Japan. However, Japanese agriculture was still unable to overcome the vagaries of the weather. During the Edo period, there were three major famines: the Kyoho famine, which began in 1732, the Temiai famine, which began in 1782, and the Tempo famine, which occurred in 1833. In the 1700s, Japan was in a period of cold weather known as the Little Ice Age. Nowadays, Japan is known for its extreme weather, but in the 1700s, Edo winters were so cold that records show that rivers even froze over. This cold weather of course had a major impact on the growth of Japan's agricultural produce. In particular, the Tenmei famine, which began in 1781, is said to have been the worst famine to hit Japan in the modern era. The bad weather and cold damage that began in the 1770s had already caused a sharp decline in the harvest of agricultural produce, particularly in the Tohoku region. Amidst these circumstances, in 1783, Mount Asama erupted, sending volcanic ash raining down on various places. The volcanic ash that rose up from the eruption also reached the stratosphere, and the decrease in sunlight caused by the ash blocking the sunlight accelerated the cold damage. As a result, a serious famine began the following year. The rice varieties at the time were not the cold-resistant varieties that have been bred since then. As a result of cultivating rice that had originally been grown in warm regions in cold regions of Japan, such as the Tohoku region, the impact of the cold damage in the Tohoku region was tremendous. In addition, the Tohoku clans originally sent a large amount of rice stored in preparation for famine to Edo to be exchanged for money. As a result, the Tohoku region, which was severely affected by the famine, continued to suffer. It is said that people even ate dead flesh to stave off their hunger. In the Tsugaru clan, out of a population of 240,000, 80,000 people are said to have starved to death, and 40,000 people are said to have left Tsugaru in search of food. In other words, the population was affected to the extent that it was halved. The famine mainly affected the Tohoku and Kanto regions, and it is said that it caused more than 900,000 deaths nationwide. According to statistics from 1786, the population of the Tohoku region was 2.37 million, and it is thought that nearly 20% of the population died of starvation or disease. When a famine like this occurs, the farmers naturally cannot pay their taxes. Even so, the samurai try to collect the taxes from the farmers for their own benefit. In order to oppose this, the farmers band together and rise up in revolt. This is known as a peasant uprising. This type of uprising also took place during the Muromachi and Warring States periods, but it was quite different in nature to that of the Edo period. During the Muromachi period, the local powerful samurai would reign as the leader of the village, and the farmers would unite under them and use force to make the daimyo and others give in to their demands. The strict class system established by Ieyasu Tokugawa divided the farmers and samurai in the villages. At the end of the Warring States period, the samurai who moved to the towns with the daimyo became samurai, while those who remained in the villages became powerful farmers known as shoya who controlled the villages. The strict class system and harsh policies that began in the Edo period succeeded in completely controlling the farmers. In the early Edo period, the farmers gave up their military power and used the method of a peasant uprising to appeal to the feudal lords, fearing them. In other words, when a group of people asked the feudal lord for tax exemption, they did so without weapons, and in a position of requesting the feudal lord as a group. Throughout the Edo period, in less than 1% of the cases of peasant uprisings, the peasants carried and used weapons. Depending on the scale, it is said that tens of thousands of peasants took part, and you can see how orderly and collective their appeals were. For this reason, the samurai on the other side were unable to take a hard line, and it was said that permission from the shogunate was required to use guns. In addition, the occurrence of uprisings was seen by the shogunate as a sign of their failure to govern the farmers, and in some cases the feudal lords were punished. For this reason, the samurai side also needed to take a moderate approach. However, even when they met, the samurai's response to the leaders of the uprisings was harsh. In the early Edo period, the leaders of uprisings were often led by the village headman, who was a powerful figure in the village. The main purpose of the uprisings was to reduce or exempt the annual tribute, or to flee to another domain. Whether or not these demands were met, the ringleaders of the uprising were always executed. In other words, the ringleaders of the uprising were always executed. They sacrificed their own lives for the sake of their village and presented their demands to the Lord. After their deaths, they were revered as righteous people who died for the sake of their village, and monuments and shrines were built in their honor. Changing the subject, by the middle of the Edo period, even among the independent Anhyakuseo farmers, there was a growing disparity between the rich and the poor. Farmers who successfully cultivated cash crops and rice became wealthy, while those who did not gradually became poorer. The wealthy farmers eventually bought the fields from the Anhyakuseo and became landowners. The Anhyakuseo who sold their land became tenants, renting the land from the landowners. In exchange for renting the land to the tenant farmers, the landowners received high-interest rents. The tenant farmers paid 37% of their harvest as tax to the feudal lord, and 28% as tax to the landowners. In this way, the relationship between the Anhyakuseo, who had been equal partners during the Edo period, became one of exploitation, with the landowners and the peasants. These landowners began to live wealthy lives. They stopped working the fields themselves and left that to the peasants. This gave them more free time, and they began to study. Surprisingly, the studies they undertook were not limited to language, but also included mathematics. Mathematics was a skill that was necessary for calculating land taxes, etc., and it developed as a unique Japanese form of mathematics alongside the development of commerce in the cities. This theory of mathematics spread to the rural landowning class, and even became a custom known as sengaku. Sengaku is the act of writing down a mathematical problem on an emotive picture tablet and dedicating it to a shrine or temple. These dedications were made not only by mathematicians, but also by mathematics enthusiasts from the wealthy rural landowning class. The purpose of the calculation was to thank the gods for solving the math problem, and to have others solve the problem you created. Those who saw the problem and answered it would then make a calculation and offer it up. This custom of donating votive tablets is unique to Japan and has no equivalent in the world. Many of the problems are related to geometry, and some of them are as difficult as those in the West at the time. The haiku poet Matsuo Basho traveled around the country while composing haiku. This was made possible by teaching haiku to wealthy landowners, who provided him with lodging and meals. In the same way, mathematicians, haiku poets, scholars, and others traveled around the country to study. It was the wealthy landowners of the countryside who entertained them. The 1780s, when the Great Tenmei Famine occurred, was a time when there were more uprisings than at any other time in the Edo period. The leaders of these uprisings were not the farmers, but rather the wealthy Suya, who were influential farmers in the early Edo period. The landowners, who owned large tracts of land and received rent from the tenant farmers, had enough money to pay their taxes. It was the tenant farmers, who made up the majority of the population in the villages, who led the uprisings of this period. Their discontent was directed at the poor response of the clan to the rising price of rice during the famine, and at the rice merchants, who they believed were driving up the price of rice. The feature of the Tenmei period uprisings was that they involved violent acts of looting. The targets of the looting were rice wholesalers and wealthy merchants who were thought to have amassed profits. Compared to the uprisings of the early Edo period, the reason why the farmers resorted to violence was probably because their trust in their lords was undermined by the fact that the feudal clan and the shogunate did not provide active support to the farmers during the famine. These acts of looting also occurred frequently in urban areas. We will explain this in the next video. In the early Edo period, many farmers were able to become onhyakuseo, or full-time farmers who owned their own land. However, there was a large gap between the rich and the poor, with some farmers being able to adapt to the highly developed commodity economy, and others not being able to. This led to a relationship of exploitation between landowners and tenant farmers. The landowners became the intellectual class, and the peasants became impoverished people who were no different from slaves. The samurai also had little to do with the highly developed economic society. Next time, I will explain the development of towns and the samurai in the middle of the Edo period. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel and press the like button.